Good evening and welcome to another instalment of me, Voice of the Forge, shooting straight from the lip. This was going to be this weekend. It was going to be the first of the instalments on the cultural impact of games and how and why literacy is informed and promoted in certain fields. Unfortunately, because of a recent article that I've just seen, written by once again the journalist, or so-called journalist Jessica Valenti in the so-called newspaper The Guardian, and I say that so-called newspaper because at the end of the day, unlike every other newspaper out there, The Guardian is privately backed. And it has a pool of money, which means that it doesn't have the same financial constraints that other newspapers have. So, whilst some people could turn around and say that's a good thing because it's not beholden to special interest groups, doesn't have to pander to certain people to make sure they get read, it has the opposite effect, because they can pander to a group of people without having that financial constraint. They can say what they like, and they don't have to worry about a consequence, because if we were to turn around and say, "Oh, we'll stop buying the Guardian," it doesn't matter. They can still make the paper, and they can still carry on, because it doesn't matter if no one buys it. It's their mouthpiece, their megaphone, and it's much like these echo chambers and hug boxes that we find in campuses and in certain chat rooms and certain websites, where if you have any inclination to disagree, then you are hounded for that, and they don't have any kind of repercussion for it because they have this insulation. And the reason why I have felt so strongly about this is elsewhere in my Twitter feed, and I'll also put it in the description box, was last night on Radio 4. They had this Lauren Laverne, which is a stage name. She was basically doing late night woman's hour, and the topic was about taking back nerd fandom. Now, a lot of what they were talking about were things like female writers for fanfic, female writers in the sci-fi and fantasy space, and other things. But nearer towards the end of the programme, they did start talking about Gamergate, sad puppies and rabid puppies, and comics. And I found that quite problematic because, again, there's this media narrative of the angry white gamer who has this elitist attitude. And she was talking. There was one cosplayer who's done cosplay, who's been on panels, and what she said happened, if it happened, was quite nasty. She was basically, because she couldn't answer a question on Captain America. This person allegedly told her to get back in the kitchen. Now, quite apart from whether or not that happened, there is the tone in which it was delivered. It could well have been part of a bit of banter which was taken the wrong way, but it's been taken as this offensive thing that, whenever a man opens their mouths, whatever comes out has to be Little Women or has to be nasty. And especially when you're talking about things like sad puppies, when they're talking about the diversity of voices and this, that, and the other, and they all talk about these being right-wing men, as opposed to, as we've seen with the Hugos, and in a previous video that I've done with sad puppies, where there's this gatekeeping to the industry. Now, it's interesting to note that the Radio 4 panel seemed to think that we were the gatekeepers to the culture, that we're the ones that are actively denying women a role in comics, in film, in literature and games. And there's this complete cognitive dissonance, whereby they can see that there is this gatekeeping effect going on, but what they don't see are the actual gatekeepers themselves. They see this consumerist thing whereby we say we like this but we don't like that, and we'll buy this but we won't buy that, as being somehow gatekeeping. Now, gatekeeping is where we don't learn about these things. Now, they mentioned several series which I've never heard of. Some of the authors, like Ursula Le Guin and others that they didn't mention, like Robin Hobb, they are massive names within the fiction writing industry, and there's nothing wrong with that if they're selling good stories. Likewise, Jim Butcher, he has several books that he's doing and 2 separate series, maybe even more by now. But it's the story that grabs us. It's the content of what they've written, not who they are, not their politics, not whether or not they've supported a dog charity or lion farm or whatever. We don't care. If we're buying a book for the story, we want a good story. If we're buying a game, we want a good game. And what these people do not seem to understand is that by the very nature of what they are arguing for is to make things that people won't want to buy because they do not conform to these good standards that already exist. And somehow the market is being seen as being oppressive. As Teal Deer would put it, oppressive shitlords. But that's because they completely and fundamentally do not understand what they're talking about. Now, Jessica Valenti has especially got on my nerves, and this is the reason why this one's being broadcast. I am going to try and keep this to 10 minutes, and I'm aware that we're on, 7 minutes now? But yeah, what's really got my goat, and what's really made me angry, is in this reporting they have mentioned a killer who oppresses women and everything else because of a 140-page misogynistic rant. Before anybody can say anything, we know where they're talking about Elliot Rodgers. Now, the fact that 6 people died is a tragic thing. But then when they try to make out that it's all women that died and that this wasn't a sexist crime, we are really into doublespeak and newthink, because Elliot Rodger killed men as well as women. He actually, in fact, killed more men than women. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you try to divide 6 unequally, and you have more men than women, that the most amount of women that could have been killed is 2. It's not rocket science, and yet this seems to be beyond this fanatical, bird-brained, misandric narrative. And then they also go on about cases in the paper which was hang on a second. Yeah, it's the violence that sexist men can do when they don't get what they want. Well, I'm sorry, but we've got tons of evidence of the violence that sexist women can do when they don't get what they want, right? And they're talking about all of this, this flood of abuse that Zoe Quinn and Anita Sarkeesian and Brianna Wu had at the start of Gamergate, and yet there's been no fact-checking. In fact, there's probably less fact-checking than there was in the UVA rape stories and the Duke Lacrosse stories, which were circulated, which again, because they've been recanted, is somehow our fault for these women making shit up. Now, they say that again. They say that Gamergate enthusiasts will say that this is coincidental. But the fact of the matter is look, we've had this form of bullying in high school where we're outed as being socially awkward, or not very many friends, or we're fat, or we're this, or we're the other. Just because you carry on saying that doesn't necessarily make it so, and because it doesn't make it necessarily so, as we've seen with Not Your Shield, you are pushing a false narrative which people are free to argue back against. But to these social justice idiots, any criticism, any debate, or anything that turns around and says, well, no, actually, you're not right, or that's not quite right. No, that's harassment. That, to them, means they've got to run away and hide in a little room with frolicking puppies and bubbles and soft music like they're 3. These are the kind of people we're fighting against. Children, infantilized adults who have always had things their way, and when they scream loud enough and throw Teddy out the pram, it all gets fixed for them. That's who we're fighting against. We're fighting against immature, infantilized adults. And I now realise I've gone over the 10-minute mark. I've managed to get what I wanted to say out. So thank you for listening to this extra quick, extra short special of Shooting Straight. I am, as always, Voice of the Forge. There will be some links to back up what I'm saying in the description box below. I hope that you like the videos, and I hope that you continue to enjoy them. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, or any comments that you want me to talk about actually when I'm doing this, please feel free, and thank you very much for listening, and good night.